I'd like to call to order the regular meeting for the Village of Pinehurst Planning and Zoning Board for November 3rd, 2022. I am Jeremy Hooper. I'll be chairing the meeting tonight. I'll point out that we do have 6 members present, and that does constitute a quorum. However, we will not be making any sort of decisions tonight. So let's go ahead and introduce ourselves, beginning on the right with Luis.
Julia Latham.
Jack Farrell.
Matt Jones.
Sonia Rothstein.
And absent tonight, we have David Alzamamora and Paul Roberts, and staff liaisons with us. We have Maria Carpenter, Alfred Cassidy, Darren Burrich, and Alex Cameron. Welcome, everyone. We'll be following the agenda as stated as provided by staff, with the first agenda item being approval of minutes. We have 2 to review. Are there any additions or corrections for the October 6th, 2022 regular meeting? Hearing none. Get a motion?
I move to approve the minutes of the October 6, 2022 regular meeting.
Second.
Motion by Jack and a second by Matt to approve the October 6th, 2022 regular minutes for the Village of Pinehurst Planning and Zoning Board. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved as written for October 6th. So now let's move on to October 24th, 2022, the Village of Pinehurst Planning and Zoning Board meeting, special minutes. Any discussion, any additions or corrections? Hearing none, can we get a motion?
I move to approve the minutes of the October 24th, 2022 special meeting.
Second.
Motion made by Jack, second by Sonia to approve the minutes as written. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none opposed, the minutes for the October 24th special meeting for the Village of Pinehurst special meeting are approved as written. Well, now we'll move on to the new business portion of our agenda, where we're going to discuss the Village Place form codes, and we'll turn it over to Darren.
Would it be better to move on to the general business item before we go into the Village Place? The meeting calendar and the organizational items, because once I'm done, you're going to want to leave, so.
Understand. I think that's well recommended. So let's go ahead and jump, unless anybody opposes that. Let's go ahead and jump to the general business, where we're going to address the 2023 P&Z and BOA meeting calendar, which I believe we all have in front of us. Does everybody want to take a few seconds to review the dates and see if there's any conflicts with any holidays or special events that may prohibit us from meeting?
Noting the December 7th is the same day as Hanukkah.
That's okay.
Oh, no, I'm just saying whether
The
it's
first night thereof.
generally whether it's,
Whatever we usually
want to
get
do
out,
that or not.
especially in the December, I think it's okay.
Any thoughts on that?
I was
Alex?
just thinking of Passover, Julia. Do you know when Passover is?
Now, let me check. Yeah, with Hanukkah, I'll be off the board by then, so I'll be home but with my kids. It'll be fine.
Well, maybe we can find a way to keep you back.
That was funny. Yeah, I couldn't get it to pull up.
It begins Wednesday, April 5th, ends Thursday, April 13th.
What begins April 5th again?
Passover. So
Passover.
we're fine.
Okay. So we're fine for that meeting. And do we need to discuss the 12/7/23? No, as
Not
well?
gonna, it should be fine.
Okay. All right, so we don't have any additions or corrections to that. Do we need to take a vote to approve? Or we do?
Do we? Yeah.
Okay, all right. All right, so after we've reviewed the calendar and the meeting dates and the time for the next following calendar year, can I get a motion to approve them as stated?
I move to approve the 2023 Planning and Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting calendar as submitted.
Second?
Second?
All right, so we have a motion by Jack to approve the calendar as submitted and a second by Matt. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the calendar is approved as submitted to us, and those will be the dates of our meetings for 2023. The next agenda item in general business is board organizational items, and if we review the packet that was handed us tonight, it is the time of the year that we discuss our ethics policy, as well as state any conflicts of interest that we may have in our participation in any other organizations, as well as review the standard procedure for the village and the conflicts of interest. And I'm just guessing that we will have the opportunity to sign that at the end of this meeting and turn that in. Is that correct? So we've just stated it. So please review, and before you go home tonight, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask now. But we'll go ahead and sign those and turn those into staff at the end of the meeting.
Question on the ethics policy. It says printed name. Do we just write it, or are we supposed to sign? I already put my engineer hat on, so.
Good point.
It says printed.
Yeah, print instead of print, instead of, writing it, signing it.
Okay. Okay, so we'll print. Any other questions regarding the organizational
Do
matters?
these have to be witnessed? No? Okay.
Anything else staff wants to add to that?
Nope.
Nope, okay. All right, so now let's back up and let's move on to new business.
Great,
All right, so we are prepared to hand this over to Darren.
great. Shannon, can you bring up the FBC? All right, now, tonight, we're going to cover another two aspects of the form-based code for Village Place, which, as we talked a little bit before, a lot of these concepts will move down to Pioneer South. We're going to talk tonight about Section 3, street design, and then Section 4, landscape design. When you look at a form-based code, there's some very important elements of the form-based code. One, it's building form. It's the form, it's the bulk, it's, how high a building is, the height of it, which is all governed with the regulating plan, the setback or build-to lines. And then the other important part of a form-based code is the public realm. The street is an important part of the public realm, and how the building relates to the street, what that street looks like, what that street functions as, is an important component of the form-based code, and that's what we're going to go over tonight. Street design chapter there's 4 elements to it. One is the overview. 2 is the complete streets philosophy, and the complete streets philosophy is nothing more than streets should be built for not just the cars, it should be built for pedestrians, bicyclists. That's the concept behind behind complete streets. Street types, it's going to be relatively easy in our case. There's two street types. One's a residential street, one's a commercial street. And then material and element standards. I am not going to go through every page of, I'm going to go through the pages, but I'm not going to read off everything in there. So as we're going through various pages, if you have a specific question, specific concern, just jump in. I'm just going to go over some of the highlights of what I see. Shannon, how do I get this thing to? See, how do I keep it from doing this? That's more difficult.
Trying to beat the 37-minute record.
Is there a different way to do that? Well, this has become more difficult for Darren and you. Oh, there's. All right, maybe we can try this. Let's just.
Let's just look at our maps.
All right, we'll go. See if this works. Nope. All right. So, this is going to be a little bit more burdensome, but we'll make it through. All right, so page 22, actually, 3.1 is the overview. And this talks about what the components are and what the general provisions regarding the street design is. And I would point you to the third paragraph, column 1. The small area plan for Village Place has been envisioned and conceived as a pedestrian-friendly environment. Streets have sidewalks on both sides, and that's important given that it's a commercial, it's going to be relatively a commercial environment, and are lined and shaded with trees. Additionally, the streets are narrower, designed to promote natural slowing effect, traffic calming, flanked by parallel parking generally on both sides. So the components of this chapter are, and we're going to the second column here, general provisions for all streets and alleys, and this does have a provision for alleys or a design requirement for alleys, including criteria for vehicle travel lanes, parallel parking, streetscape plantings, and sidewalks and medians. And what this kind of elevates is we do have some of these standards in effect right now in the ESSM, the Engineering Specifications and Standards Manual, but this has some different, it goes beyond our ESSM in certain ways. So we have we have street types identifying specific design and dimensional criteria for each of the street types and material and element standards. So now we go down to general provisions, and this gets into some of those design requirements like street curb radii, travel lane, the travel lane width, and number 2, travel lane width is 10 feet. So in both the residential and commercial street environment, they're both as 10 feet wide. I've seen them down as close as 8 feet. I've seen them up to 12 to 15 feet, depending on the right-of-way and the environment. 10 feet seems to be good enough for this particular area. If we're sitting on a highway somewhere, wider would be better. But we're in a lower volume, slower moving traffic situation, so 10 feet should be fine. Alley width, our minimum alley width is going to be, I believe, 20 feet if required for fire access. That was within a 24-foot right-of-way. Correct, if required for fire.
Where do we designate that?
We'd have to do that when we start to look at the building form. So if the building, if the fire can't access it from the front side of the building, which it generally can, there would be a requirement, and it would have to come in from the back side for service purposes, then it would have to be at 20 feet.
So that'll come with the site plan
Correct.
analysis.
Correct. That is correct.
There's a distance requirement which they need to be able to have access to within so many
150
feet.
feet.
Yeah.
I mean, we wanted to narrow them up, but 20 feet could easily work. So I guess that's going to come about when we actually respond to a development. But those are kind of the two standards that are out there. Column 3, sidewalks on both sides. We talked a little bit about that. ADA accessibility. Street tree plantings, that's section 9. And we'll go down to bullet number 2, which is right here. Darn it. Generally, street groupings should be planted at intervals to provide shading of the sidewalks. In general, street groupings should be planted no more than 60 feet apart, excepting on the intersections. Variation in tree spacing is appropriate to the character of Pinehurst and will vary based on location. Location, adjacent uses, street lighting, underground utilities, and above-ground structures. And this is really a guideline for us because when somebody comes in and is building a street, a lot of that street construction is really governed by us and the ESSM. So we have a lot of review. We have a lot of review discretion, and in the form-based code, these recommendations are things that we'll take into consideration when people are coming in for street design.
Do you have a list of trees that can't be planted, or is that in the regular ordinance, or do you not care?
But we do care. We're getting to
I
that in
mean,
section
you
4.
plant a Bradford pear next to the sidewalk, first wind you have, it's down.
Alex, we do have a list of approved street trees, do we not?
We have an appendices of recommended plantings. the street tree requirement we have in place now is not very specific. It is more geared toward the longleaf pine, of course, but also other large hardwoods can be used as well.
But there are some horrendous trees that
There
could be
are,
planted.
and Bradford pears are a perfect example of that. Because they are, and there's other trees that if it's going to be a village right-of-way that are just a mess to maintain long-term. And you don't, they make a mess year-round, they leave year-round, they have cones that drop year-round. And if you have areas of pedestrian areas or amenity zones like you see in here, then you don't really want that necessarily right on top of that. So that's something we really probably should take a hard look at.
Yeah, we should have something like that. I'm not seeing it anywhere in here, so that's something we should probably do. And something that we can easily add, because that's, again, that's part of that
So
could be made.
within the small area plans and the form-based codes for these two areas, for example, we can have separate street tree requirements and specify the types and size and so forth of trees. Okay.
I'm guessing the
you-
logic,
Do it, because you're right, Alex. I mean, I've seen some magnolias and otherwise.
Bad choice.
That should not be
It'd be
in the
tough.
right of way.
It's very expensive to maintain, too.
Actually,
Exactly.
it should be in the general ordinance rather than just these separate ones.
I think when we get to the landscape design, I know we're recommending native plantings, and if you've looked at the plant palette, I think they've done a pretty good job of identifying types of trees that should be located in various locations, and that might be, the plant palette might be something that we can actually take and recommend various street trees. So I think we can easily do that.
I guess the logic behind having unfavored street trees would be possibly an increase in effort from the village to maintain those areas if it was something that we did not prefer, or it could create an unsafe environment for pedestrian traffic. Am I wrong there, or was there anything okay.
No, you're absolutely right.
Okay, that was total guess. Thanks.
And I don't, without going through the SSM, you can't identify any of the trees, can you? Now, we'll circle back to that.
There's an allowance for a different type of species if it's approved by the village engineer, which again, Darren's point, that does give a lot of discretion there. So that would probably be, that application before has been brought up, and of course, that's where we consult with our streets and grounds or buildings and grounds staff, and they're proposing this type of tree, like absolutely not, or yes, it's suitable for this area, it will thrive, or there's some species that just, depending on that nature of that built environment that it's going to be around, it may not really have any longevity either, so that's another concern. You want something that's going to actually thrive and do what it's intended to do.
Any other questions on street trees? So we go over to the right-hand column, and then we talk about this becomes placement. They shouldn't be too close to street drains, shouldn't be too close to other signs, things like that. Any questions specifically on that fourth column over?
Or on this page, is this where sidewalk width would be called out, or is that just
Nope.
whatever it is in the engineering standards manual?
Ooh,
would be
we'll get there in 2 pages, I think.
Okay.
All right, any other questions on this page? Then we will clumsily get to the next page. Okay, so the next page, this is actually taken from the Village Place Plan proper. It still needs some adjustments, and it will get adjusted based on what council had approved. We just haven't made the specific changes to this document yet, but they've been made in the Village Place Plan. But this is the proposed circulation plan. And this really shows where the proposed streets would be located within the area. So you don't see, we're not proposing to add a lot of streets as part of the Village Place Plan. You can see this core area, the crossroads that we propose to create kind of around that brewery, and that's that active area that active neighborhood that we're proposing to create. If you can remember our high-intensity plan for Village Place, we showed a series of streets going around through this area as well, just north of the greens, and we backed away from that. We adopted as the preferred design, the low intensity, which really just keeps this as green space. We did show this, and we know that there's potentially grade issues coming through here on Kelly Extended, but we also do show that as a potential walkway connection in the future. So there could be a priority put on, installing some type of pedestrian connections up this way, and when the need arises, we can actually put a road through there. Medlin here extended. Medlin could be extended to connect up with Board Branch to create a developable site, and that's really why that potential road extension is there. We had originally showed this connection going through to Medlin, or to Magnolia, and that fell off as part of this process. So any questions on this particular diagram?
The village has or can construct right-of-way for all of these designated streets to be installed, is that correct?
It's going to take some acquisition, yeah. So there's a couple sites that we'd have to acquire.
There is an extension of Kelly right now.
Yes, that one we definitely could, because we own all that.
There extension of Medlin,
I don't believe,
village owned the right-of-way there?
no.
Okay. Well, within the core area, since most of that is village property, and once it's developed, I guess we could then designate the street layouts pretty easily.
Yeah, we could. And I think what's going to happen when we actually codify this thing, there'll be a notation that if we start to build roads in it, that it follow this general diagram. It might move back and forth, but this would be the preferred layout if
Okay.
we can get that to.
And we have Power Plant Road.
We do have power plant.
Already on there, so yeah, that connects through the brewery, so we have a good portion of that.
Yeah, we can handle, I think we can do,
Actually, Power Plant Road, is it platted all the way
Yes, it
through
does.
the area, all the way out to community?
I think it's
It is.
dedicated.
How about Spur?
Spurs dedicated to this point. But the good thing about this plan here, I'm glad we're talking about this, these roads should be we should be able to accommodate most of this because a lot of this is in the public service facility.
Right.
This road out to McCaskill might be a little more difficult because you've got a private property owner on the right over, no, this might be the ambulance, the emergency response site, the Moore County ambulance site. So this one could be a little bit more problematic, but again, we're showing this for future purposes, if something changes, just to kind of, and this area still can all develop at some point. So I think this layout works relatively well. This could work, should we want to decide it, because you're right, Jack, we control all this. But Medlin, this shows a possible example of how you extend through here to create, more developable and accessible sites. So if somebody comes in there and develops the frontage off for some office area, having another road connection here to line up versus having a bunch of driveway connections out on Magnolia, that would be preferred. That would be the preferred layout.
Okay.
I kind of have a general question. Do street names come through this board?
No.
I don't.
You're getting excited.
In that whole thing where McIntyre comes in, the new road, and then Spur Road comes over, I just want to make sure that it's consistent, which is Spur and which is McIntyre, and then that connector between McCaskill and Dundee. That whole little bit in there, which is actually the meat of this,
You're talking about this little area in here, right?
could be confusing, that's all.
And I think the way that it's designed, it could be easily gridded, but I think the design was trying to get back to the Olmsted design of the center to have kind of those sweeping curves and creating that kind of that green space in here as well. So I think that was kind of the idea
I'm
behind
only
it.
saying that because I'm confused when I go out of my driveway with the 5 streets. I still can't, I have to look at them to make sure which one is Barrett and which one is
Yeah.
Mackenzie and which one is,
Welcome to
So-
Pinehurst.
and then my driveway.
Hey,
And
Darren,
nobody, when I'm coming out of there, nobody recognizes turn signals or anything. 'Cause it's,
That's a different issue. But I don't, from that perspective, I think the design makes sense, but we haven't engineered it out. So at this point, it's a concept. When we start to actually go to design and start to put put Matt's hat onto it, then we're going to, it's going to change a little
I
bit.
was really curious about street names.
Hey, Darren, one question. If the land that's for sale, I'm guessing that's behind the EMS area today, comes with a proposed development over the next couple years
Right over
before
here.
we're prepared, this thing comes to shape, we will still have the opportunity to work with the developer at that point to preserve what you're planning here, is that right?
I would hope, yes, I would hope so.
Okay, so we would, at that point in time, be able to say, well, there's that planned road that we just couldn't implement today that would abut that
Yeah, and-
property. We would just need to make sure that we take the right steps, and I guess we could. That would not jeopardize any of that opportunity if a development came to.
In North Carolina, it's a little, where I came from in Wisconsin, we had a strong official mapping statute. So if we were looking at this in Wisconsin, what I would do, and I sound with that accent, sorry. We would just map all these roads. And that's how we would preserve them, to preserve this development plan. Right now, it's more of a recommendation unless we can get them to come into a conditional zoning or something like that. And then we can, then as part of a condition, we could negotiate that. So yeah, where we don't actually own the road, that becomes, it's more of a strong encouragement, but I don't think we have the ability, unless we potentially financially put some financial incentives behind it or something like that, where we can actually mandate that road.
We're
be
aware of our
installed.
position, I'm guessing, and you've thought, I'm sure staff has thought about
Mm-hmm.
that. If that piece of property turns into a development proposal soon, would it jeopardize what we're planning here? So.
Could, that, it could, but that's also why having this idea in place for anybody who wants to come in and potentially look at developing that site and go, oh, the village has these plans together, how can we take advantage of that particular configuration? And that's where that negotiation comes into play. It scares me, not having, with Pioneer South, think of those areas in Pioneer South, especially, where the Mahaley track is and all that 40 acres that we can't map. We can only show this and kind of encourage them to say, this looks like a logical layout. We can't map it, so we just have to show it to the developer and go, this is what the possibility could simply be.
Could you think of a scenario that would severely disrupt that opportunity with that property and how it would disrupt what the plans are today? I'm thinking what the opportunity is to build there today. I'm sure it's, what's it zoned at?
That site is challenged. It's zoned VMU. That's where the dry cleaners site was, I believe.
Laundry,
Go with the state about the environmental.
laundry area, yeah.
Right,
right.
that's
Laundry
why
area.
it has
Yeah,
been
the
sold.
laundry.
It's been for sale for a long time.
It has been.
Held up because of that.
There's wetland issues there, I believe, because it looks like it's pretty wet
Okay.
back there. So I think that's why it's sitting, probably hasn't been bought, because there are some potential issues with that site. That being said, it's a good development site within that area, but somebody could buy it and maybe come forward and put a building maybe oriented towards Magnolia or McCaskill, and that might, you're right, it might adjust the plan going forward.
Well, if there's just anything that we can do to, I guess, solidify our position, and I'm sure you would take that, I'm guessing, or propose that,
We could buy it.
buy it. Correct, yeah, we could definitely buy it. That would be it. That would be the safest one, of course. Thank you.
That always takes care of it. Any other questions on this particular page? And this is adapted from the Village Place plan. So we'll go to the next page, and there again. And this, all right, so this page is the complete streets page, and this really talks about, streets should be for more than just cars. It should be for bikes, it should be for pedestrians, and that's kind of that concept, why we have sidewalks on both sides of the street, things like that. So this just talks a little bit about those concepts, and this shows kind of what our street designs are going to be going to be the concepts behind what the components of the street. So let me see. I think we have a better page. So you can see how it's designed with the travel lanes, the parking lanes, the tree zone, and the building zone. And that's
This page is primarily tutorial.
Correct.
Telling us what a complete street
It is.
definition is, okay.
And it
thanks.
kind of shows, this really lines up with the next page after it. And
Right.
the next page after it,
What is the amenity zone? Is that like for trees and
Mm-hmm.
bike racks and benches and?
yes, that's that part of there's the planting zone, and that's kind of that, it says optional zone. So that would make it, that would have to make it be wider, wouldn't it? So we have the pedestrian zone where the sidewalk is, the amenity zone, that, yeah, you are correct, that is where the benches or those things could be, it would be a little bit wider, but you could actually put, within that planting zone, because the entire area is not going to be a planted terrace, you could actually put, you could put park benches and things in between these two areas.
Garbage cans, what have you?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's a good pickup, I didn't even see the amenity zone. There's what? Is it off? Make a note of that in a moment. Okay. All right, next page. And this discusses what each of those zones are. So the building zone is the front facade of the building to the edge of the sidewalk. And that's that area where you have landscaping, where you have some hardscaping, where outdoor tables, chairs, seating, all that kind of stuff could occur potentially in that building zone area.
So if a cafe wanted to have outdoor seating, it would be within their building zone?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's where you kind of want it, because you don't want it actually in the sidewalk. In some of the places that I've worked in Oshkosh, we had to actually put them in that sidewalk area, but you have to maintain ADA accessibility, you have all those issues. So if by design, you can design that capability in it with what we're doing here with that 10, and requiring a minimum or a build to line, you're building that area in for the future. So think about, in front of the Drum and Quill, they have that area is back from the sidewalk, that concept would go to that building zone area. Then naturally, the next zone is the pedestrian zone. That's where the sidewalk is, as it's shown here. The other zone is the TZ is the tree zone. That's that area between the sidewalk and the curb. I want to make a note about amenity zone. We could potentially add that. Then the parking zone is P, right up here in the upper right, and you can see that the precedent image is on Market Street, it's just showing some of that parallel parking. And then the lane that we all like, which is the travel lane, that's where you drive, of course.
So I'm sure we're going to get this in detail, but this recommendation is parallel parking only throughout. There is no designation of
Angle?
angled-in parking, right? It's all parallel parking, except for some streets which will have no parking along them, like
I would
Rattlesnake.
assume so, correct.
Okay.
And the reason for, when
No, I'm fine with that. I just want to make sure that
that is.
that people understand that.
And some of the understanding of, just for everybody's benefit a little bit, is that kind of that angled parking in higher traveled commercial environments, you have more conflicts with traffic, you have more accidents with traffic. You put angled parking in when you're trying to get a lot more parking in place, but in this area, if we design parking appropriate to the use in the first place, the parallel parking combined with the off-street parking should be enough parking in these areas. And it actually, you can fit, you don't have to widen out the right-of-way more. Say, if you had angled parking on both sides of the street, you'd have to widen out the right-of-way just a little bit more, because with the parallel parking, all you need is a 9x18 spot. Now you're on both sides, there's more potential conflicts with angle.
Well, the other people note that angled parking destroys the view, the streetscape view. You see nothing but the rear of vehicles
Car.
all the way throughout the village.
That-
And that's
that-
true in some streets in the village. That's all you see is the rear of F-150 pickup trucks in there.
And you're not seeing this, right, Jack? You're not seeing.
Inches.
You're not seeing these front facades, you're not seeing the storefronts, you're not seeing the
Correct.
activity that's going on. And what happens too is it potentially widens out that right-of-way. So if I'm on the other side of the street, then you're right, I'm just seeing a row of cars, the back ends of the cars.
Well, this kind of works, I guess, hand in hand, and works with your street frontage recommendation strategy as well.
Yes,
That in mind.
yep. And that build too, so it pairs up with the build
Right,
too.
and
The form,
setbacks and that type of thing that we previously discussed.
yep, all those good components of the form-based code, the controlling the form and height, that setback, and then what we put in the right of way. Those are all those,
How parallel parking and then would look in front of that.
well, Creighton Place.
Just one question. This parking looks to me like it's based on the retail, the first floor stuff. And so, and the parallel parking and whatever, the number of spaces. But if upstairs is residential, which it can be in some areas, that's more parking. Or if it could be office, that's more parking. So does a developer have to do something in back?
Developer will have to provide, the on-street parking will not be part of the will not be part of
Okay.
the parking equation. It's all going to be on the developer to provide it off-site.
Right, that's the way it should be.
Yep. Where possible. And that's, we're redeveloping this entire place, so they should have the ability to maximize parking off-site.
So all roads in this area are designed to be two-way, no one-way
Yes.
streets.
Yes.
Okay, my second question is,
Which is more beneficial to everybody but the traffic flow.
right, about golf carts. Would there is there any special consideration that should be given to the parking combination of cars and golf carts in the area, knowing that that will happen, now in the core, obviously you park a golf cart in a parking spot and you try to park it in a way that it's visible so somebody doesn't rear end it, thinking it's an open spot. Maybe a little easier to do in parallel parking, but I'm just, in general, in this kind of design, is there any way to give consideration to that?
I'm not sure if you really need to specifically design for golf carts on the street, because you can probably wedge, two golf carts in a standard spot. So,
So would these be striped parallel spots?
yes, yes,
Okay.
to control it.
So like if you got a golf cart at the front, a car wouldn't pull up against the golf cart, they're gonna leave that space and then potentially.
I can't tell you what somebody's.
I know, but it's just in the planning level of, is there, that's my question, is there
Maybe you're right.
consideration?
I don't know.
Would we then consider some golf cart parallel parking there, or I'm sorry, angled parking within that parallel?
I think,
Oh, that's a good
And
idea.
even as a part of the strategy and definitions?
I think these are all good questions that we'd have during the actual design of the street to see what, where that bump out might be. Where we've put like motorcycle parking and potentially golf cart parking in those areas where you can't fit a full-size space. So there might be areas where we have too much left over that doesn't fit a car, and we don't want to put it into some other type of use, where we maximize that for golf cart parking, where we maximize it for
Like you
some
can
other
get
form.
1.5 vehicle stalls, but you can get 3 golf cart stalls.
Well,
And we do allow now for part of the parking requirement up to a certain percentage can be made up by alternate means, such as golf cart or, there's also compact spaces, right?
Compact, yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah,
Well,
it's
using
probably worth
myself,
noting, what is that stall dimension and what?
Wouldn't
what
this
space you
mostly
have?
be at the detailed site plan level? That
It would, when you start to get down to street design, because
I don't
we
think we
we
can't
don't know. that-
micromanage it just yet.
But I guess if the purpose of this is to help developers have ideas, and
That's true.
we value that, then it might be worth a paragraph that just says.
I agree.
That's a good point.
Here's something to consider.
well, because if you drive down in front of where Dugan's is today, and I've done this, so I'm probably putting myself in some sort of shoe, but pull the golf cart in at an angle where all the cars are parallel parking, and then other golf carts can fit, or you can fit the
Yep.
ends. There's just no designated area, and if there was some sort of direction, then those with golf carts would then migrate towards that area, and that could provide some sort of simplicity, I think, as well. So just some thoughts.
No, I think what Matt,
Some of us do already park in an angled fashion in a parallel spot with a golf cart periodically.
yeah, no, I think that's something again, it's part of the design, we should put it in, we should put at least a statement in here to talk about it.
Or maybe the end, maybe each end or something.
Does the village have, or will they be able to obtain the necessary 60 or 70-foot right-of-way in each of these situations?
We should. We should, because again, if the core area develops the way it should, that should almost be like a blank slate, so there should be enough room in there to fit that 60
Core
foot.
area is yet to be, built out, so to speak, so you can probably get to that. I forget if that's a 70-foot requirement or not.
No, 60.
It's 60?
For the commercial, and we'll get that on the next page.
Okay, yeah,
The-
let's-
Both right-of-ways are shown at 60 feet. And the only difference is the width of the parking, the parallel parking in the commercial versus the parallel
Right,
parking in the
right.
residential. So any other questions on this particular, on the streetscape zones? Now we can move into the fun area that Matt will like. And this is hard to see, I know that, let's see here. So this is the layout of a commercial street, the recommended design of a commercial street. So this is your typical street section. Again, you see the street section key over here in the middle. And can I grab that? No, I can't. I do not. Street section, building zone, pedestrian zone, tree zone, parallel parking, and travel lanes. And then you can kind of see I'm sorry, I'm messing around with this diagram here. So if you go to the diagram on the upper right, you talk about the building zone. In those commercial areas, you can see where that 10-foot setback is. So we're proposing a 10-foot build-to line. So you can see that build-to line, and that could be the on-site amenity zone for each of those businesses. Then you go to the 5-foot wide pedestrian zone, so that a standard sidewalk is 5 feet. Which, we could up it, we could make this a little bit narrower, or a little bit wider, because you can see the tree zone. We're showing the tree zone at 6 feet. The minimum you'd want to have it is 5, but they're showing 6 right here. And if we needed to widen out the sidewalk, we potentially could. And then you have the next to that, going to the right, you have the parallel parking lane, which is 9 feet. Again, I've seen those narrower as well, but with today's trucks and everything, 9 feet is probably warranted for a commercial area. Then you have the 2-foot travel lanes, and then it works back the same distance the other side.
Well, and then visually, I don't think our picture's necessarily to scale, and I'm sure that's okay. But visually, when you're standing in a 10-foot section or a 21-foot section, it doesn't feel as roomy as you would think. So that probably is going to play in again to that whole street frontage strategy. And then I agree with you on that whole 9-foot width, not going any smaller.
Yeah.
But could you go bigger, so?
For a commercial area.
Is the curbing within the parking zone? And do we have a recommendation for curbing going forward in this area?
We don't have, I think we at this point, we defer back to the ESSM on that. But that's a good point. Do we need to have a recommendation on curbing? Is there a specific type of curbing that
We want to carry the similar curbing throughout, if possible.
Good. What was that? How have we been playing?
Yeah, and that's typically how we've been applying the standards when their connections or common development throughout that they.
But the edge of the curve should set that 9-foot edge of the parking zone. So it'd be that front face, the vertical face of the curb, that would be the,
Have vertical curbing, or whether it's going to be,
it should be vertical curbing. These are the areas,
normally in an urban environment, you have that, yeah.
yep.
I think,
We shouldn't waver on that in commercial areas.
yeah, and I think that might be our standard in non-residential development as it stands. And that is the vertical face is how we measure currently.
Yeah, it would be from the vertical face.
Seems to me that most of the village has no curbs, or they are they're 3 inches high. I mean, that's just, so I don't know whether it needs to be made that it blends in with the historic village or not.
Well, in the commercial area, like if you go over to, in the hospital district, they have curbs over in the hospital district,
Right.
right? So in these higher traveled pedestrian and vehicle areas, you're gonna wanna have curb. And with these areas, we have the ability to do that because it envisions redevelopment of most of those areas. I think
Also important for the
McCaskill's got it too.
stormwater management going forward.
Stormwater
too.
management.
Extremely important, yeah.
But the rest of the village, which is more residentially based, sure, because you have a system of ditches
Swales, yeah.
and swales that are carrying all that stuff.
So yeah, like for Kelly and Medlin, those areas, maybe considerations for a different type of.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask about when you get to the Rattlesnake Trail.
Oh, so this is down below, shows the sidewalk, the type of sidewalk, the ladder sidewalks, and these are more high visibility sidewalks, and they usually signal to a driver coming through that this is a pedestrian zone. And so these are the type of crosswalks that we envision. You can see some of these bump outs, so you bump out here to a amenity zone kind of, or a traffic zone, not a tree zone, sorry. And then you want to have your car set back far enough from the crosswalk so you don't have any vision issues.
So this is depicted as like a four-way stop, but we don't actually, how many of those would we have based on the current plan?
You'd probably have one in the middle by the core area, then you probably only have one, right?
Because the other ones are flow-through on Rattlesnake.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, there's only one really four-way stop, and that's right here in the middle of the core. Everything else is probably what, a two-way stop, but I don't see any other four-way stops in this area. So that really becomes that diagram.
That little triangle will continue tradition of confusing everyone.
Well, we haven't designed it yet.
Excellent, I'm glad we're doing that.
We're trying to emulate the historical character.
So between PZ, the pedestrian zone, and the building zone, I mean, it's a distinct zone because of the right-of-way, but really in terms of material type and what that looks like, it's the same. I mean, at least in this image, right? It's the walkway out in front of the building that is really more than 5 feet. You've got, to the building frontage.
10 feet, it should be 10 feet.
Well, you got 10 plus 5 for the sidewalk, but what I'm recognizing is, I mean, you can see there's like people walking down it on both. So for the average person, so like in terms of maintenance, how does this work? Does the village own the brick up to that point, and then the brick beyond that is the individual businesses?
Within the building zone?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because, I mean, there's a line there, and that's the right-of-way, but the material just continues, so it's not like
No, there should be a break in there. When we get to landscaping, we talk about hardscape breaks.
okay.
So wait till we get to chapter, there should be a different, there should be a distinct difference between the sidewalk pattern and if there's hardscaping on the adjacent private property.
And
To show that distinction. Yeah, those folks in there are kind of a little misleading because but those people could be going into the door and not walking along the side. So,
back under the streetscape zones page, it does say, building zone is the private yard area, and that's where
Right.
supposed to be that termination of the quote-unquote public realm versus the private.
yeah, and so if you look at Market Street, look at it, you don't really have a building zone. The building zone goes right up to the edge of the sidewalk. You don't have a tree zone. So, and this is, the reason why is it was an alley at one time, and it's only 35-foot wide right-of-way. So you can't do a lot within that 35-foot right-of-way. So,
Yeah, so it's going to feel more spacious in this area than it really does in downtown right now.
yeah, somewhat. If you go to the adjacent block over on Cherokee, that is a 60-foot wide right-of-way, but you have a combination of angle parking and you have a combination of parallel parking. And the parallel parking is really only where you really have some active frontage areas. Think of where the wine shop is, then you think of where the Drum and Quill is, and you have a lot of active outdoor uses there, and you have parallel parking. So it's easy to see what's going on in those businesses because the cars are parked so close to they're parallel parked versus on the other side of the road, which is a little bit misleading because I think on the other side of the road, I think the topography is the road crowns up and then goes down to the curb. So it's easier to see the front of those buildings too, so. But I digress. Any other questions? Sorry. Did I lose my spot? Matt, did I answer your question? What question did you have? I think I
I
veered
didn't
off,
really-
and
I didn't,
that was my intention to
wasn't
veer you
fair,
off.
I didn't ask you one, I just made a comment and was
Oh,
trying
I
to
jumped
find
on it? Okay, I'm sorry.
It seems ambiguous and maybe it, because like if you look at that aerial, the aerial shows all one material type. You know, it doesn't obviously show a separate sidewalk in that plan view there. So there's like no sidewalk in this drawing, it's just a.
Yeah, you're right.
common walk
You're seeing,
space.
you're not seeing the zone. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
You're seeing this, you're seeing the foundation planting, but that's probably not 10, it's probably not, you're right, it's not in scale.
So, I mean, I like the way it looks, I just was wanted to
No,
be
you're right.
clear on which one is more representative of what the goal is.
No, that's a good point. I mean, no, you are absolutely correct. I mean, it looks like it's a little bit, the scale looks like, I don't know if they shrunk the scale to make this work this way, but the concept is still there. So we have the concept with the, it's irritating me. The concept is still here, so this still shows the intended dimensions of that area. And the zones are relatively clear on this image. I'll have to look and see if I can do anything on that lower image to make that. a little
Yeah,
bit
if you
more
intend for there actually to be a defined sidewalk rather than a full.
There is. Let's get to the landscaping section. I think it talks about that. All right. The next type of street is a typical residential street, and really the only main difference between the residential is, let me see if I can zoom in. Get up here. So you have all your typical zones: building zone, pedestrian zone, tree zone, parking, or parallel parking, and lane. And the only main difference is the parking lane has moved down to 8 feet because it's a residential area, so you should be getting less trips in this area. And we've widened out the tree zone to add more of that, green to the overall area. The sidewalk area stays the same at 5 feet. So that is the only major difference, is the parking shrunk up a little bit and the tree zone got a little bit wider. So you have these wider green kind of terraces within a residential area.
Seems to me that these two examples, the precedents, are either single-family attached or
Oh,
condominium kind of design, townhouse.
Yep.
So I'd be curious, because of this, the homes in the area, if somebody wanted actually a single-family home, and this is all pulled up to the street and whatever. So suppose I wanted to just build a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house.
where? Yeah, Manor.
Well, I mean, it can happen because there's so much vacant land here. Oh. Oh, I'm sorry.
That is a Manor or Villa lot, that's correct.
What is the porch encroachment?
No, and the regulating plan allows for this a standalone residential on the other, for this one. Really, there's only 2 areas, and the major one would be that area at the corner of McCaskill and Magnolia as a residential development. But you can see, here's that terrace concept right here, where the tree zone is, where it could be a treed terrace area. And in the residential area, it'd be just a little bit wider. Now, let's get to the fun one, rattlesnake. So this has some plan recommendations for rattlesnake, right?
My question.
I believe we do have
What
a-
right-of-way do we have at Magnolia?
I believe we
60?
do have on rattlesnake?
On Rattlesnake, I'm sorry.
I believe we have 60 foot the entire way.
Okay.
At least 60 foot. I think I've
So
looked
the
at,
proposed would work within our right-of-way.
it would work. Now I'm not saying there's not going to be challenges. There's going to be challenges with utilities for planting purposes. Both sides right now, I think, have ditches running along for stormwater. So all those things, those are going to be some of the challenges. But
Does the current Magnolia, or excuse me, does the current Rattlesnake Trail paved area is it centered on our right-of-way?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not sure about that one. I don't know. I'll have to look at, I really don't know on that one, Jack. It's a good question.
Well, the reason I ask that is to implement the proposed, that clearly the right-of-way is
I'm assuming.
really actually not centered on, it's actually offset.
Even if it's off, well, you're getting a little bit into design, but I think generally we should be able to do this. We have enough right of way to do this concept. Does it have to, maybe it has to narrow up, maybe that tree zone has to narrow up in some areas because of where the center is. But I think what the concept is trying to get at here is try to get at sidewalks on either side of Rattlesnake, because if you go down Rattlesnake every once in a while, you see people that are taking their lives in their hands sometimes on Rattlesnake in
Absolutely.
traffic.
And this is really one of the reasons I'm asking this is I think that the core area is very aspirational, that we're going to move the Public Works out and we're going to be able to put all this together and so forth, and I hope it comes to fruition, but it's more aspirational and potentially long-term. Whereas Rattlesnake, if the village chooses, it could in fact implement this right today, this proposed streetscape. And maybe then people would get the idea, maybe we ought to build, according to how good the streetscape is. And so that's why I'm asking about the current right-of-way and whether we have it and whether we want to really take the initiative to create the streetscape, hoping to implement, or hoping that people are incentivized to build to the streetscape.
And there's a good example right now that was just built in the district. So if you go just at the corner, just up from the corner of Rattlesnake and McCaskill, across from that vacant lot, across from the Greens vacant lot, Phase 8,
Right.
there's a new sidewalk that's been placed in there. It's a beautiful brick paver sidewalk. But it was required to as part of that development. But it's the only sidewalk sitting there. It's a beautiful sidewalk. But that sets the stage for the next person or
Right, it's
for
a
the
sidewalk
village.
to nowhere, which is very common in a lot of municipalities.
It is.
But I was just asking, the question is whether we had the right-of-way and whether
I'm
we
gonna check.
realize
Let me check with that,
Rattlesnake
Jack.
is prepared for this type of proposed reorder. And we can implement it.
I think I've looked at it. I think so, but let me verify that.
I have no idea what type of capital outlay it would take to implement the proposed.
I was actually looking at pricing that out. So I was pricing out how much, and I
Yeah,
don't
that's
have
something
notes with
for
me.
council to consider in their long-term plan.
The biggest issue is, going into it, we can understand how much the pavers are gonna cost per square foot, right? We know that. But it becomes that site prep with those, with maybe potentially having to move the utility or having to fill in that ditch. Those are things that I just don't have a great handle on because I don't know how much it's gonna cost.
Right.
So just a point of context for support of this, when we think about how many events that we have as a village, the opportunity for some residential construction a little further on Rattlesnake, as well as that has been conducted on Woods, and we think of Craig Road and that type of thing.
Yep.
And, just this past Monday night for Halloween, there was an increased amount of trick-or-treaters in that area due to, I guess, some of the housing was there. And there was a lot of getting off the road for the cars, certainly down Rattlesnake, to your point. And if more residential construction comes off of Rattlesnake, it would be possibly more important.
Correct? Yeah. And the other thing that we are not showing in here, Jack, this is, I think if you look at the proposed, and the design must have accounted for some of that, what you were just talking about. So if you look at the right-of-way that they have under the proposed, and you can see it's at 47 feet wide, and one side, that tree zone is on the left side, that tree zone is 10 feet wide. You have your two 10-foot travel lanes, then you get on the other side, you have a 7 and a 5.
Well, then they got 13 feet on the right side there of that drawing, at least, and it looks like it's kind of leftovers land or something to
Yeah.
that effect.
Well, that would give you your 60.
That
that's your
that
margin
creates
of
the
error.
60, that's why I asked, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that's your margin of error then, if depending on where it lays.
We should do a little bit more analysis on that, but I think the concept is fine. We can look at it by the time we get back.
Yeah.
Next time I'll have.
I know it's a work in process.
I'll have, we should be able to easily answer that question, but the concept is, if you're all right with that concept of having sidewalks on both sides of Rattlesnake, I mean, the one thing that it's lacking is any parking, so there's no parking ability with there's just no parking area on
Well,
either side.
I've heard the comments about parking on Rattlesnake previously in other meetings, and people are not thrilled with the idea of having particularly parallel parking on Rattlesnake if it's going to be a semi-busy thoroughfare.
But the one area where I, say, should we look at trying to find a way to incorporate some parallel parking or angle parking, I'm not advocating for that, would be that area below, was it Kelly? Below Kelly, where that little business district is, where, where you have Village Printer, where you have Village Printers, you have that new inspection business, so you have a bunch of businesses along there that should go through some period of redevelopment.
Right. And is that considered the active frontage area?
No, we were backing off the active
Yeah, yeah,
frontage.
right, that's what I thought.
In that area. But still, those sites are all small, right? So every one of those sites are small. In order to provide enough parking, we might have to take another look at that area from a parking standpoint, because that's one of those areas where we're trying to promote,
I got it.
more.
Okay.
Right now, it's all just pulling in front, isn't it?
What
I mean, the
space is
Village
there?
Printers is,
Yeah, it is.
Limited room.
yeah.
They have a sort of a turnaround type of thing in front of the building, yeah. Or you can go in the back if you're picking up something.
Jack, have you reviewed, it sounds like you've possibly reviewed really where Rattlesnake lies on the right-of-way?
No, I have
Okay,
not.
you have, okay, it sounded like to me like
Thanks
you'd
for giving
I
me
didn't know if you'd
credit, but
seen
that-
any.
No,
Well, without pulling a property corner, it's going to be, like, even if you look on the aerial, it looks like it's in the middle, but you can't really trust that
Yeah,
unless
the
you know exactly where the
GIS
property corner is,
Can be deceiving, yeah.
take it off, so. The other thing I was just noticing is the power poles on the west side of Rattlesnake are about 7 feet off the edge of pavement, going all the way down. So, they're in the wrong space for a sidewalk on that side.
Yeah.
Well, they can be moved. It's not cheap, but they can be moved. And I think the overall goal is to underground as much of the utilities in this area as we can, because it's a kind of a blighting influence.
Yeah, we really haven't talked about utilities. That's a very good point. And some of it is kind of destroys the whole ambiance
does.
of the area when you have all that wires hanging back and forth and all the rest of it.
Agreed, but that's really,
Can that be part of a small area plan, that all future development has to start putting utilities underground?
I think that's one of the recommendations. I think that's in the code right now. It's in our PDO that you have to underground.
Where you're not preempted from statute.
Yeah, there's a specific state preemption.
Right, I understand that. Okay.
Sounds like there's a lot of challenges up and down Rattlesnake and to implement parking versus pedestrian traffic. There's certainly some points where a decision would have to be made, which one's going to take precedent over the other. Am I reading that incorrectly? Certainly it's right there at the interest of Rattlesnake and the parking that's on one
I think so.
side. So you would then have to make a decision, do you want to continue your pedestrian traffic smoothly or provide parking as well?
Or how do you do both? How can we do both? Do we narrow up the lane on one side? I mean, this area right here between McCaskill and Woods, you have a number of parcels here, right? So you got a number of different parcels here and on this side that are going to go through. This side has more ability to provide parking, right? Because these are deeper lots. But here, you don't have as much ability to provide a lot of off-street parking as you don't with this area either. So, when we actually get to that design point, maybe we should be looking at, is there a way that we can accommodate additional parking? Because we know that we've heard that every once in a while, that there's some parking issues over here.
Thinking about parking, if you slide that whole thing south just a hair,
Oh, you're going to make me
Sorry.
have to work on this? Let's see.
or not,
Not cooperating.
if we go up,
Hold on,
Mag-
there we
no,
go.
no, the other way.
Oh, the other way?
Yeah. Stop. Okay. If we go up Magnolia to the intersection with the non-platted street there before the police department, yep, south of the police department.
Like the extension of Kelly.
Yeah.
This is
there-
not-
No, you're fine, just with your pointer. There was talk about an amphitheater right in there.
Shown in here.
The Julia Latham Amphitheater. I'm wondering, where would parking be imagined for such a creature?
Village Hall.
Village
you
Hall,
know,
Magnolia Road.
and the round depart-
Potentially, if this was a road, you could do it
Grassy
there.
Wicker and people would walk over?
Probably. I mean, they do not, I mean, when there's an event in the garden or across the street,
Sure, at Timmel Pavilion or wherever.
yeah, there's,
No, there's a lot of parking, for the ball field, I mean,
Yeah,
the
Grassy Wicker.
recreation facility
Yeah.
there too.
Okay.
by the way, the amphitheater, you'll see it in our next section here, in section 4.
So excited.
So the undergrounding utilities, definitely, I think, there is a lot of clutter as you come down Magnolia, and as you come down McCaskill. A lot of that is probably, was all historically driven because of the types of uses that were there as well. You had heavy,
I'm all for Jack extending the sidewalk along Rattlesnake, more than that. But I wonder how, and that would be at village expense, correct? Putting in the sidewalk? It's not. If we were to extend it. Yeah.
we could do it either way.
That's highly unusual, but anyway, I wonder what you do with curb cuts, because you don't know where they're going to be. And if they are going to be.
Well, I think if you looked at the lot, our idea is that it'll be generally a commercial rear-loaded, but on some of these areas where it's too narrow, like on the east side of Rattlesnake, you're going to invariably have to have some curb cuts. So I think the idea is that those curb cuts, and we got to figure out if we can mandate that, have to be shared. So you'd have to have a shared one between two uses. That way you limit the amount of curb cuts from a parking standpoint.
I like your idea about moving the telephone or the equipment poles. I guess you don't call them telephone poles anymore, do you? They don't even run telephone lines. So,
Be underground.
but I think if they have to be moved, I think the first place they need to be moved is underground. So,
It's just very pricey, somebody's got to pay for it, and that's part of the issue. Now, when somebody comes in and does a redevelopment, we can make them put in sidewalks. So we can get sidewalks here, and if everybody was coming in and doing something at once, then we'd have a sidewalk system in place. But we don't know when the next development's going to occur at this point in that Rattlesnake area. So the policy decision that we're going to have as a community is, do we have enough activity? Do we have enough support? Do we have enough need to install sidewalks along at least one side of Rattlesnake all the way to the existing facility up here on Woods?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this small area plan and the subsequent changes or the form-based code actually begs the question of council, do they want to put the money into extending sidewalks, the length of, and beefing up the view of Rattlesnake Trail? I mean, it serves a pretty sizable community across 211, and they want to do that for an investment in the area, hoping that people would realize that the streetscape is worth spending a little more money on the buildings associated with it.
And it's not much dissimilar than the process of installing the sidewalks along Magnolia on the south side of McCaskill, or like Jeremy mentioned, down Rattlesnake and on the other side of the community center, and then down Woods Road, based on feedback and surveys and everything
We're
else.
probably a little off topic here, but it's worth at least discussing at some point in time.
And the village does we do fund annually it has been $400,000 for sidewalk enhancements. And we've recently done that. The Woods Road one was part of, I believe was part of that program, the
Right.
brick pavers that we put in there. All right. Move down, if I can manage this. I think we're almost done. Talked about the residential, we've now talked about Rattlesnake. We'll take a look at some of the questions that we raised there. And here's your typical alley section. We talked early on about this.
Yeah, alleys, you know, the way alleys were originally promulgated, if you will, 100 years ago, was that in every deed, Mr. Tufts wrote, there's 12 feet on the back of your property that is an alley, and it must be kept open for public use. I mean, to what extent can we do this with a new development?
Subdivision site plan approval process. That's how we would do it.
And what if there's 3 parcels in a block, and the center parcel is being developed, but they're all rear-loaded, according to us, buildings. Now, the rear-loaded means it has to have an alleyway behind it or some type of access behind it. How do you force that to happen?
Easement, potentially an easement off the backside and wait for other development to
So you're
occur.
forcing an easement on the associated properties, parcels.
I don't think you can do that. So you, in that instance.
Maybe I'm overthinking this, but
No, you're-
alleyways are extremely important for the viability of this area rather than trucks blocking the streets day and night in the commercial area.
I think you're right. It's how do you, the scenario you raised is a great scenario. So if that happens, how would you do something other than, is there a way to allow for an access to be built on an interim basis that would go away as the adjacent properties are developed and easements will be given? It sounds like it's complex.
Yeah, and we
is
see,
complex.
our history is we've seen in the village some actions people have taken to close off alleyways or
Yes.
other type of what we thought were public access routes. So it has to be thought through pretty carefully with this development.
It is, but the benefit that we have on these particular ones is a lot of these are larger. A lot of these, except for that stuff over in McIntyre there, a lot of these are larger parcels that will be going through some period of, so hopefully we have the ability to do that. Some of the smaller ones like McIntyre, I don't know how we would do that. How would you bisect that area with an alley and you have 20 different property owners in there, for example?
Right.
So I think you just have to go, it's not going to work in this case. The alley is an ideal thing that we'd like to get wherever possible, but there might be areas where it just physically is not going to work. We don't have the room.
Right.
Those alley closures can't be done arbitrarily by the property owner, can they? I mean, street or alley closure. I mean, it has such impact on the rest of the village, really, when you think about it. So, I mean, it seems to me that that's the kind of thing that ought to come to this board, it ought to go to the council. I mean, closing an alley is.
There's alleys that are
Major thing.
dedicated to the public, and then there's alleys that are there via easement. And
There's a strict process for closing any kind of formal right-of-way that has been dedicated as a public right-of-way.
Right.
But we digress.
Just seems to me that there needs to be a process for street or alley closures.
There's a statutory process to do that.
Assuming that the village has control in some way, shape, or form of the central core area, you know what I'm talking about, bounded by, and has a master development plan, would the village lay out right-of-ways and designate those as public right-of-ways? I'm talking about alleys now.
I think
In other words, in laying out that area, assumption is you move Public Works and you're able to access and get control of the Hughes property and some others, and you have complete control of that block, would a master plan include right-of-ways that become village property, alleys that become village property?
depends on what
Maybe I'm
That-
thinking too far ahead, but
I'm trying to think through some of the reasons you would probably, I would think you would want it as a public, you'd want to be able to.
Have to maintain it, of course,
Maintain it
that's
as
the
a
dilemma.
public alley, so I think you'd want that. But you might be thinking just, I mean, you're getting into the future, and I think it's hard, conceptually, I think yes.
well, I mean, I love these alleyways. For example, in a residential development, for example, the bottom picture there, that's I've seen this quite often lately in various developments where they have access to the rear of the property through we'll call it an alleyway for better purposes. And I assume that the homeowners association in that case has control and maintains the quote alleyway. Whereas in a commercial area where there's multiple parcels that are owned by different people, I'm not sure exactly how that works, how you're able to force that to happen.
That would have to be part of the development review process or part of if somebody comes in, well, first of all, the area in that core area, shouldn't be an issue for us in that because we will control all that.
Okay.
The other areas that are coming in privately, we have the recommendation for we want to promote alleys, we want rear loading. So how are you going to make that work? And then they're just going to
Because
come
we were
in.
very heavy on rear loading. I mean,
Where?
and the rear loading implies that there's rear access, and rear access means there's alleys.
Alleys or
It all kind of falls in place.
alleys or other secondary streets. So if you go down Rattlesnake Trail, I mean, you've got Board Branch Road, which could be the back alley for those developments those office developments along there. Between McIntyre and Rattlesnake, probably not, you're not gonna get anything there. The only, on the VR property, which the Tradition site, you have alleys
That's different.
designed.
That could be developed en masse, and you can lay that out appropriately.
Think about this, so if somebody comes in and wants to develop the Tradition site, and want to put a bunch of townhouses on there, those townhouses are gonna be rear loaded, so they're going to have to get a secondary access
Yeah,
somewhere.
that'll be a complete site plan.
Yes.
I think that'll take care of itself.
Yeah.
I'm more concerned about the core area if in fact it becomes parceled out and out Rattlesnake.
We shouldn't parcel it out. If we go through the process of being able to assemble all this into one developable site, it should be one master planned site, and all that should be.
Good point.
Again, that all should be part of that.
No, that's
any
good. That's a
development
good
agreement.
point.
All right. I say a lot of shoulds, but, all right. I can't get to this. So we had the alleys, and this is, all right, so if we go to the next page, what page are we? Last 2 pages, this is the material and element standards. And this really, this gets into, what type of materials are being used in the travel lanes. And we talk about street furnishings, we talk about street lights, things like that. I'm not going to get into the individual components of this unless people want to talk about it. This streetlight image, however, is the image that we use for our own streetlights that we put in there around the building here as well. So we put that, and some pictures right here in front of the building. So that, we talk about street furnishings and what they should look like, and they should be uniforms, things like that. Does anybody have any questions on these 2 pages? Good.
Well,
Oh, you do?
we skipped the material for pavement material. I think the note in there just says something about it could be considered to be alternative, but is asphalt like the default, or is there other consideration in this area? If we're wanting it to be walkable for other types of, brick pavers or et cetera, things that are way harder to maintain, but look.
Well, I think brick
better.
pavers are the preferred,
For travel lanes?
oh, for travel lanes? No. Oh. What does the, hold on one second.
Falls to the ESSM, I think.
Alternative sustainable pavements may be investigated and improved by planning development in villages, but shall be chosen for durability and ease of maintenance.
That just says you can come to us with an idea and we'll evaluate it, but I think our standard is asphalt or concrete, asphalt or concrete for roads. In the commercial setting, these should actually be, in my opinion, they should be concrete because they're longer lasting.
I mean, the ESSM is just, it's been around a long time. So I'm sure updates are coming, but is asphalt what you want to stick with in here, I guess, is that?
I think that's a good point. I think, just personally, concrete's in a commercial area, that should be the appropriate material, but maybe I'm missing something of that from a policy standpoint. Yeah, I won't do that. Materials, asphalt.
Yeah, comment.
All right, anything else on that?
Nope, that was it.
That's it?
Yep.
Well, good, that was very helpful. The discussion on this was great. Now we'll move to the landscaping one. This one should be a little bit quicker because there's a lot less technical jargon in here. And really the landscaping for this is talking about, really becomes the landscaping for the open space types and the plazas that we're promoting. There's a couple really important concepts to get to. Shannon, where is this now? Do I have to? Let's figure out how to not do this again. I know how to not do it. I need to put it on a thumb drive and bring it over here.
I don't think it has an Adobe on here, it defaults to the web browser, and that's the problem.
Really? What? All right. We'll handle that. Makes it very unwieldy for me to do this. All right.
But we enjoy it.
At least somebody enjoys my pain. All right, landscape design. So the section is made up of landscape design. Section 4.1 is that overview. 4.2 is the open space types. That's where we talk about central green, attached green, things like that. Material and element standards, and then lot landscape plans. And this chapter does have the recommended plant palette in it. All right. So I'll just hit some of the important concepts on this page, which is the overview. Why is there so much screen up there? We can't get that as full screen? All right. All right, so on the overview page, one of the important paragraphs is on the first column, fourth paragraph down. In this area. The Pinehurst Development Ordinance, where is it? Right here. Right here. The Pinehurst Development Ordinance, Section 9.5 landscaping requirements shall be used for all minimal dimensional plant standards and buffers. So when a development comes in, we're going to use our own landscaping requirements. There'll be some things in here where they go over and above or where they may conflict. Where they conflict, the form-based code recommendations are going to apply. So the second part of that is, however, the design intent shall follow the form-based code, and where a conflict between the FBO and PDO, FBC and PDO occurs, the FBC criteria shall supersede. So I think one of the more important concepts here is general provisions for open space. It's the middle column, general provisions, the bottom part. And this is a significant change for us. A minimum, and we saw it a little bit last week on lot standards, a minimum of 8% of the net developable acreage of any lot, excepting infill single-family residential lots, whether public or private, shall be provided as open space. The idea with the form-based code and with these village place plans is we wanted to create a walkable, livable kind of environment, and creating these green areas, whether it's the central green that's shown in the village place plan, or if somebody comes in with a multi-acre development, we want to make sure that they have green space, some type of plaza, something on that property for, essentially public enjoyment.
And that would not include the landscape stretch that's outside of the property boundary. It would only include.
No, the idea is it's exclusive of the landscaping requirements. It's an open space kind of grid plaza type of requirement. Every property is recommended or will have one if we pass this code. If we go over to this section, general provisions for lots, this is kind of important, and I need some follow-up on this particular page, but I'm gonna read this one over.
Can I go back to that requirement?
Sure.
I don't quite understand that for commercial property, in a core area. why you would demand open space be allocated for commercial development on a parcel.
To prevent, to allow for more green space to be created, for more public areas for people to gather or on that site potentially.
But the lot standards we had certain building requirements, minimum has to fill 75%, of the frontage and so forth, and other requirements. And some of the requirements sounded like you were trying to use the entire parcel for a commercial venture, whether it be retail or otherwise. And I didn't see any room for what we're going to do with open space. Where would they allocate open space?
That's up for them it would be up for them to design that as part of it. We just go into it saying, you need to provide 8%, needs to be available or made to open space, and whatever those open space requirements are. If you can see some of the larger developments on the next two pages, you see the attached, in the next pages, you'll see what do you see? You see the types. We have the central green, which would be a public one. You have plazas. You have attached greens. You have pedestrian it's really that becomes those attached greens and plazas.
Yeah, well, I understand where you're coming from if in fact there's a very large parcel that someone is developing and it has, access roads and it has sidewalks and it has, all kinds of other things. But if turns out to be it's a commercial parcel, in a high-density commercial area, where would you put open space?
That's for them to figure that out. I mean, it's not like it's, we can't get in a site design for them. We're just saying, you need to provide the 8%. The 8% could probably be in front of that building in that building zone area potentially.
Okay.
Right?
All right, I don't want it to be to death because it'll be site dependent.
I mean, do we think it's a bad idea to have more green space in a
Oh, I like the
commercial-
idea of open space, but it's just a matter of practicality in a commercial environment.
It's, when you're thinking about designing a whole community, it really makes sense from the idea of, these 4 lots, they're 8% altogether, it creates a plaza, so nice. When you're thinking about, this building and this building and this building going down the street, it's hard to envision how that 8% becomes usable open space. I'm not saying it's a bad goal. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. It's just hard to envision it when you're thinking about, the smaller lots, to translate that thought into it being usable public open space, as opposed to, oh, there's a little yard in front of the, coffee shop.
If you look on page 38 where we talk about the attached green, they say, and they just give an example of what that attached green looks like. It's a larger attached green, but typically they're saying at least 2,400 square feet, but not more than 2 acres would be some type of attached green. But you're right. If we get down to individual parcels, say a parcel is 20,000 square feet, you take 8% of that. What is that? That's, I can't do that math. There's the math whiz.
Oh, whatever, it can be
Less
solved
than
at the
2,000
site plan
square feet.
level, but still.
No, you raise a good point. For some of these smaller infill parcels, how is that going to work? And maybe,
Right, I mean, if you're developing a block, it's great. You
Yeah.
end up with, we moved here from Chicago, you end up with a little interior city garden. They also have them all over Boston. They're lovely. But I just don't know how it happens, how it works when you're just building your coffee shop.
well, if the coffee shop is part of a large development, yes. If it's the smaller, so let's think about that area between McIntyre and Rattlesnake, where all those small businesses are. If they're going through a period of redevelopment, what does that look like? What is that 8%? That's something we need to think about. So I'm going to spend some time thinking about that and maybe finding examples. I mean, that's the easiest thing. There's another thing that we can do. If you can't provide an 8%, there might be could we do a payment in lieu of? So I can't provide my 8% effectively on a lot. I'm going to fund a payment in lieu of for
Absolutely.
the same purpose.
Absolutely. And thinking about it, I'm now arguing with myself, but thinking about the roast office, It's very nice that they have that little side yard that they've gone and put tables in during the summer when it's, on that side, that green space. It works very nicely. So,
And now,
no idea if it's 8% more or less, no idea.
now that I think about it as well, you have, what do you have? You've got potentially the wine shop, in between the wine shop and Old Theo's there, there was that open space kind of area where there's seating in there.
What is the
Right, 'cause-
definition of open
That's what I was
space?
gonna say, open space doesn't mean vegetation.
No,
It just means there's not a building there.
Is that what it means? There's just no,
Because note
Building it?
8 says paving materials and installation methods to take accessibility needs into consideration. So that leads me to think
it could be hardscape, potentially.
there's a lot of flexibility.
We need to firm up what open space is, and I thought we had the definition. Oh, that's a good point.
I'm sure there is a definition somewhere.
There is. Open space, a separate lot or indoor or outdoor area space designated for plazas, promenades, greens, gardens, parks, and other spaces intended to support community interactions and gatherings.
So it's for public use.
So it's not for the coffee shop to say you can only sit here if you have purchased food from our establishment.
Well, I think that is, yeah. I think that's, yeah, I mean, it's not, you can't just wander on there and sit there. It's still going to be, it's an open space that's going to be provided on site for whoever's building that is.
Oh, so it's not for the public.
For the public who are using that
Yeah, whoever's
particular.
using that
Well,
property.
you kind of have to define that a little bit better, because if you tell me something's for the public, I'm going to go sit on it.
Because the ownership still stays with the lot, and so.
It does.
And it's fine, we just have to make sure that we're careful with our language.
Yeah, I agree.
It does, but you're right, you can't go and sit at those places without being a patron of those, well, I don't think you can.
I'm trying to just make sure that I have an idea of where this could conceivably become an issue, and is it along Rattlesnake Trail? Because I'm guessing if something happens in between the McCaskill and the brewery area, that would.
That
then
should
become
all be a
a
little-
site that would be handled.
That's why we're showing that big green, that big central green there is because of that.
Rattlesnake area, some other little short roads, it could be coming, if we're redeveloping a small lot, it could become an issue.
I think McIntyre's gonna be McIntyre would be probably could be the biggest problem. Guess what? You all know what happens if you can't meet the requirements of the ordinance.
Yes, for variance.
There's an outlet. There's two ways to do it. There's an outlet through a variance, or potentially we go through a period of a conditional rezoning. You're still gonna see them both. But now I'm thinking, as we're talking about it, let's talk about the Greens Phase 2. You know, that building's still out there. They'd have to come in and go, oh, you gotta put potentially 8%. Can you find 8%? Because that is going to be a mixed-use building. They should be able to find 8% on that site, and they should be able to effectively put that, they could probably put that at the corner of McCaskill and Rattlesnake, and I think the original plans do show kind of an open space area up front of that building.
Trying to measure how much of a problem we would create. And I'm just trying to see, that does not have an outlet, and to your point, it always would have an outlet.
We always have an outlet, and if we think that we've made a mistake on any of this stuff, any of this code, we can always evaluate and say, it's just not working, let's make a change, let's make a code change, and we do it all the time. So, but this is going into it conceptually. I think we all like a lot of the stuff that we're seeing conceptually. Now it gets down to paper and development. If we're running into issues and we're consistently running into issues, then we might have to back off on some of this stuff. But I'd rather go into it with a little bit more aggressive, and then figure it out. I'd rather, shoot for the, stars to try and get what we really want, and then ratchet it back if we need to.
Thanks.
All right. I think I got waylaid. Is there any other questions on this particular page? That was good conversation, by the way. All right, so this shows, I hate this. This shows the proposed page, what is it? What page is this? Page 35. This shows the proposed open space and pedestrian network. We see Julia's amphitheater over here at the corner of Kelly and Magnolia. See this little thing? And then we have the central green that we're proposing in this particular, right now that we're proposing in this particular area. And we can do that because if we assemble all these areas, we can potentially create a green space over here. This is, the Hughes building is along the other side of this, but we can do this because this would all be part of our property. What we're not showing these individual 8% green spaces anywhere else because we don't know what any development's gonna look like going forward in the future. But again, it's a good, in my opinion, it's a good concept, and then you can see how well connected we're proposing we're proposing here. So you can also see, you know, what we've been trying to do for a long time is how do we create this spine? How do we create this a better connection to village center? And you can see that, you know, we're hoping that maybe that we can provide some type of pedestrian connection between Power Plant Road extended and Community Road up through the Pinecrest property that would connect you closer to the village center. All that requires easements. This is a lot of aspirational things, but they're good aspirations to have to connect to these areas. So this one might be a little bit more difficult between the old fire station and, what is that? Is that the care cottage over there?
I think Central Green looks like a great future Pinehurst Park to be owned and managed by the village.
Owned and managed by, it will be, and that's the idea, that there should be some type of central green, and it really kind of, having a plaza or central green for what we're trying to, you know, produce or show in this area, I think it adds to the already, a lot of green space that we have adjacent with the Arboretum, but having another space within this, hopefully you'll have a little bit higher density of commercial development in this area. I think that's a benefit, and that, you know, it can also help these neighbors that are around it as well. Any questions on the proposed open space map? You've seen this before as part of the Village Place plan. And then we get into the next page. And this talks about the types of open spaces right over here. This talks about the central green, the plazas, the attached greens, the pedestrian passages, and the natural buffer areas. And remember, we talked about the pedestrian passages last time a little bit. We're still looking into that. We've actually found some communities that have standards for pedestrian passages, and we might see if we can get those incorporated into the mix. So here is an image, and this chapter really does focus on those plazas and what they should look like. But you can see right here on page 37 what that central green is intended to look like. Again, we haven't designed it out, but it's a concept right now, and you know, it's a doable concept if we can, you know, move forward with the relocation of the public works facility, our public service facility. So you can see we were showing an adaptive reuse of the building structure that's on there. That doesn't need to stay. Everything can change in here, but this is kind of the idea of what this could look like at some point in the future. Any questions on that? And then we go into discussions on the next few pages of what the greens would look like, potentially look like. Here's an attached green. So if somebody came in somewhere, these are probably townhouse structures right here. As part of development, this would be some type of attached green that they would have for them. Whether this could be a public one, because I think it's how we write the ordinance, especially for some of these plazas and greens, not the individual ones serving a site, but this is probably part of a larger development.
Sort of the difference of something being a public accommodation or public property.
Yeah. Here's an internal green, and these are areas that I could actually see. So you see this green, what is this? This is a neighborhood green. So this is a typical neighborhood green. We don't really even have a requirement. So if somebody comes in with a subdivision or anything like that, we don't have a parks requirement or anything like that. So this concept, if somebody came in with a large residential development, potentially in Pinehurst South, on the east side of the road, this is something that we could we could say, take your 8%, put it into this small type of park to serve the residents of your facility.
That's becoming very popular in a lot of developments as well, as that front green space, utilizing it as their requirement, but then a gathering space for their residential development as well. So that front yard's kind of becoming the backyard in an essence. And I think we've seen that in development in Pinehurst as well.
We have.
Yeah, so.
And we used to have, in my old code where I came from, we had a code where when you came in, you had to provide a certain amount of space for park dedication land use. So you'd come in, or we'd give you you could pay us a fee in lieu of, but we actually developed these small neighborhood parks that came in these large subdivisions, similar to what's concepted here.
I forget the PDO and its requirements relative to open space. I mean, does open space exclude non-buildable properties such as flood zone and/or stormwater management areas, or are you allowed to include those areas in your open space?
Nope, because when we've looked at subdivisions where we've seen detention basins as the open space, trying to claim it as the open space, said, no, you can't. You can't incorporate that
It
in.
specifically excludes these type of non-buildable areas as not applicable to the open space calculation?
And we might have to look at our open space, our definition of open space in chapter 9 versus the open space definition in this thing to see how they.
Yeah, I'd like to
To see how
double
they,
check that.
but Alex, what was your comment on what Jack was?
I think the last sentence in our current definition for open space says that areas used primarily for stormwater retention or management areas and the like are not included in the overall calculation for open space. So you can't give yourself credit for meeting the open space requirement for the areas that are used for stormwater management and the like.
Or otherwise unbuildable?
And our floodplain damage prevention ordinance doesn't allow for platting of lots.
Oh, I know
within
that, but does it
floodplain
allow
too.
including that area in the calculation?
It does, if it's if it's in the floodplain, yes, you could use that as an amenity or open space type area.
Jack, you're raising a good point in that.
No, that's
What is the
something, when we
purpose?
redo the PDO, we'd take a look at that.
But what I'm getting at is, you're raising a good point between this open space and what the intent of this open space is, and some of the open space requirements that we have for our own subdivision. This open space is meant to be usable open space. Is the open space requirement that we have meant to be usable, or is it just meant to be kind of set aside as kind of like a reserve? And there's a distinct difference between the two.
Okay.
All right, so we talked a little bit about pedestrian passageways at the last meeting. This one just talks about what that design would look like, having a 5 to 8 foot minimum clear path and 5 foot on either side. We've gone to the drawing board to try and figure out this whole center block issue with trying to create these or promote some of these. So we're continuing to work on that. So we're going to have something coming up in the future on that. But again, we do have a recommendation of what that should look like. Talk about the natural areas. And then we get into the plant palette. Or what did I miss? Okay, then we get kind of into the plant palette, which is material and element standards. And this is where we get into some of the landscape, some of the hardscape, and some of the site furnishing requirements. So in here, you can see kind of the type, we get into a discussion on the plant types. That's really all it is. And then we get into an actual plant palette. So I'm not going to get into the individual characteristics of this, but this plant palette is based on native plantings. So it's heavy on native plantings for the area for recommendation.
And this is consistent with the village planting guide?
Subset, yep, I think.
Or has it been checked, or, I mean, there's a note about the planting guide in the beginning of this
There is a note.
offers additional insight into design, intentions, et cetera, but, these tables in here are pretty specific. I'm just curious if they're consistent or if that's something we should
That's a good
check.
That's a good discussion point. I like this. I think this plant palette is helpful. I think it's more helpful than the plant palette that we have in the PDO. I think the PDO, is the PDO all native? I don't think PDO is all native plantings, is it, Alex? I think it's heavy on native plantings. But I think, I mean, this really gets specifically, you have small trees, tall trees, large shrubs, medium shrubs, low shrubs, ferns, grasses, perennials. This is a really good planting guide. So you're right, we should look at it, how it compares up with the planting guide, but it's a good planning guide that I think that we could actually adjust our own landscaping ordinance and schedule to kind of potentially mirror this. I think when we first saw this, Alex, I think we were excited because we thought it was better than what we currently have.
So this was recommended to us, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's pared down from what we currently have.
It is? Okay. That's what I was wondering. Was this plant palette recommended to us by Design Collective?
Yes, they
Okay.
had a horticulturalist or a landscape architect
Does,
that did this.
I guess, go ahead.
go ahead, finish.
No, I was just going to say, I would like to make sure that we put in our own, I guess, mesh the two together would be
We
my
can.
thoughts. But to your point, I think it gives great direction to a developer of what to do. I would just want to make sure that it's directed towards what we actually want to achieve, and it very well may be. Back to my earlier point from a few meetings ago, I would just hate to see this plant palette in another municipality's plan that's, duplicated over and over and over and over again, so. That's
No, because it's based on native planting, so the native plantings for around here should not be up in the Northeast.
So they did get some thought to that, is your point.
Yeah, you wouldn't find these too much in Maine, some of them. I believe that, FYI, I believe that the beautification committee is aware of this planting palette and so forth, and if they have any concerns, I suspect.
Oh, I'd love to hear
they'll
it.
get directly to you, because they have some very strong people as far as very, very knowledgeable in this area.
We'd love to hear from them on this, Jack.
Okay.
Now, the other thing that comes to mind is I know at one point the village put some real effort into creating a list of shrubs that pair well with our deer and keep our deer from eating them and being in the village and being hit by cars in really busy areas. So I think we need to think about planting things that are not going to be delicious.
If you find it, let me know.
Or
The village
invasive,
the
or
village
invasive.
did a very nice pamphlet on,
They did, yeah.
yeah,
Is that right?
Planting guide for something.
Right.
But we also spend a lot of money from the village to put out the stuff for the deer, so you're not gonna be able to just plant stuff that the deer don't. This village puts out stuff, I know, big, huge things for the deer, so there's really no plants that the deers don't eat. I mean, they eat everything. Very, very few. do
oh,
they.
I don't know, the village put together a very nice pamphlet a while ago. I have no idea if it's any good.
We can look at those, this is a task. So look at that.
No, from the people that work for the village, they put out the deer stuff twice a week.
The one other note that I'm going to have that I didn't cover, I missed it before, was this landscaping guide does anticipate foundation plantings. That's not a current requirement in the commercial code, but this does anticipate having foundation plantings, yes.
And I noticed that earlier it stated that the foundation planting should be on the street sides and not all the way around. In the PDO and other areas, is it still all the way around, or is it now just
Depends.
pins? Okay. Some areas are all the way around, some areas are not. Okay, I got you. But for this, it's just really street frontage.
Well, I think that's where it's promoting it, but I don't see a reason why, a lot of times why you can't have foundation plantings and landscaping on either side, on the side of the building, unless it's a hardscape area where you're got, tables and chairs and things like that. I think, if we can promote more foundation plantings, I think again, that adds to the placemaking and softens the look of that development. But I think the priority is on that front.
What's in my head is you know, the alleyways, I don't know if that's, you know, passable enough to where, I don't know if that's something that we should, would be of consideration. And I also don't want to promote overplanting the whole area as well and creating something that's not usable. But, you know, I don't know if there should be some planting along the alleyways in the back or just other areas.
I used to have, and maybe we'll have to look at it, we had a point system. So where I came from, you'd have to have X amount of points of landscaping adjacent to a foundation, or it had to be over here. And that might be something that we might want to incorporate into this process. So we'll take a look at that as well. You're right, you don't want to overplant.
Then I just kind of go back to one of my earlier concerns of just making sure everything's kind of similar. And if we have some residential areas that now do not have to have foundation planting all the way around, but their neighbors do, it's, you know, just for an overall
I think
thought.
residential, we have to have them all the way around.
Even for residential in this area, they would need to be all the way around. Okay, all right, I'm just curious.
All right, so through the plan, and you can see on the plan palette that there's notes, whether it be, you know, the Latin name, the common name, and then native or adaptive. And then there's a note, like I'm looking at one for the rusty black haw. It says, keep off sidewalks due to fruit. So that concern that we raised about, you know, having something on the sidewalk that's dropping pine cones, maybe this is where we'd start showing up. That could be a potential issue, would show up on here. And then I'm not going to spend too much on this next page, other than this is where Matt, because I'm not going to really get into site furnishings unless somebody wants to talk about site furnishings. But here you go, Matt. This is where we start talking about transitions between the hardscaping for potentially the sidewalk over here. I don't know which one is which, but you can see the idea is there is a different type of transition, a different type of materials from public over to onto the private side. And I don't have any other, unless somebody else has seen anything else in here on the sites, the site fixed, you know, the benches. We want them to be consistent, pots and planters, you know, tree grates, things like that.
With benches, I was a little confused because I thought earlier it said all benches will be the Pinehurst bench. And I kind of grinned at that, and I was wondering if we'd trademarked it. And now they're saying that benches can have some variation, so.
Where does that say? Where are you looking at that?
Let me see if I can find the Pinehurst bench.
I want to know.
There it is. It's in 3.0 on street furnishings, page 31.
Page 31. 31 in the other chapter?
Yeah.
Okay.
So 3.0, it says benches in the right-of-way shall be the standard Pinehurst bench, capitalized. And then in 4, it talks about these different materials. So I guess these other benches could be out of the right-of-way. But right-of-way benches must be the standard
Yes,
bench.
that's correct.
Okay,
This is referring to some of those plazas and things like that.
all right, got it, thank you.
Yeah, because you want that uniformity in your right-of-way area, but you want to allow for some variety.
Is there any requirement or specification on art, public art, or yard art, sometimes called yard art in residential areas?
Do we want some?
Yeah, I think you should.
I mean, we did, I've seen numerous ordinances.
If I
where-
wanted to put a very large golf club in my front yard,
Oh.
for example,
No, I mean, there's not a prohibition on that, because that'd be considered landscape, part of the landscaping, unless it's a sign. Unless we could.
Art, yeah. Definition.
But you do raise a good point, though. I mean, I've seen development requirements where if you're doing a larger development, X amount of, you have to provide a piece of public art.
provide art,
Have to
correct.
provide
yeah,
public art, yeah.
sculptures and so forth.
I mean, that could play into that whole plaza thing. You could do,
Well, we could consciously not include it or consciously include it. I mean, one of the, however you
Oh, I
want.
li-
To make a decision is all I'm saying.
I'd like, we haven't even contemplated that, but I don't think that's,
Contemplate it.
I don't think that's a bad I don't think
Sure,
they're a
this
bad
is
thing.
relative, but if someone decided to paint a big mural on the side of there.
That's what I thought you were
Different.
going for.
Hey, is
Let's
that
not
kind of
get-
along the same lines, or is that something different?
Let's not get into murals.
Is that getting into signage or art as well?
That is
Do we not-
actually
I mean,
a
But I don't want to also
sign.
turn a blind eye to it, if it's something that.
It's
should be
it's a graphic.
That's considered a graph.
No, it depends on what's there. You have to read it.
Prohibited in the historic district.
We don't allow them anyhow. We do? Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, we don't allow them. All right, I'm done talking.
Okay.
Oh, look at, I almost took you out the whole 2 hours. See, you wouldn't have been ready to do the other stuff.
Have we been a benefit to you?
No, you've been very helpful. This is all helpful.
I know sometimes that's debatable, but.
No, it's
From
helpful.
my point, not theirs.
You guys are great. I appreciate this.
All right.
We will meet December 1st.
So to Darren's point there, our next meeting date is 12/1/22. Have anybody have anything else they would like to mention?
We might have to have, we haven't had any, we don't have any special meetings planned between them? Do we want to have, do people have any time for another special? I know I'm asking a lot of you.
Well, I think we're getting into the holidays as well. I mean, I'm not opposed to that, but I think that's where the calendar gets a little bit more stringent.
Okay.
Also.
So we should talk about when we're having our Christmas get-together, that's what I'm hearing. Or Hanukkah.
Or we should have a Christmas get-together to discuss this in this room as we sit around this table. is
I
the
don't
point, right?
know if that's it.
It's public. All right, so unless we want to dig into that, I'll accept a motion to
Well,
adjourn.
I do want to update
Please.
the board. There will be a need for Board of Adjustment to convene on the December set date. December 1st, is that right? Yeah.
Okay.
You're gonna have to, and we may have an item, we may have a public hearing item, so I'm not,
We could have an agenda item for us, for the Planning and Zoning Board as
Correct.
well. Could possibly, right?
That would be, that would be a terrible evening. But that would be three very probably lengthy public hearings.
So we should
What?
come prepared.
how many public hearings do we have? We don't have any scheduled yet.
We'd be on vacation.
If we have the
The
one
BOA?
legislative hearing.
Yeah.
And then 2 BOA hearings.
2?
I'm hearing that we have 2 BOA hearings and potentially 1 legislative hearing for the Planning and Zoning.
Stay tuned.
But don't everybody run yet.
Maybe
till
that's
they
an
confirm
off
that,
meeting.
please.
Maybe
Don't
that's
go on
a special
vacation
meeting.
on purpose.
That would give us an extra week on the noticing. But
Well, the
anyway, I just
prob-
wanted to make you guys aware. I know David's not here, but I did speak with him this morning as chair of the BOA, so he's aware of what's coming for the December meeting.
Well, the problem I have with not having, we are coming in the holidays, and I would like to squeeze an extra meeting or 2 in there if we can make it work with everybody's schedule. If we can. If we can't, I don't want to impose on you, but if we can make a meeting work.
Well, if you propose a meeting, the way that we've been doing it through email and selecting a dates, does that seem to work for
Okay,
everybody? I mean, it
we'll
seemed
put something out, yeah. We'll just pull you. I mean, I know that, I understand, we have the holidays coming up, so I fully understand, but I'm just trying to I want to get through this,
Okay.
so.
I think we understand that, and if you propose one, then
Okay.
you'll send it out as a poll. is
Yep,
what I'm hearing,
I will.
right? Okay. All
Yep.
right. Anything else?
I'm good.
All right, so now if we want to adjourn, take the motion.
Make a motion with adjourn.
Motion by Sonia, do we have a
Seconded.
second? Second by Jack, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you all.